My family skipped the biggest moment of my life. No calls, no messages, not even a polite excuse. Just silence. Loud enough to echo through the parts of me I thought I'd left behind. So when the news broke about my company's $92 million valuation, I didn't expect anything from them. I was in my office, papers stacked like tiny monuments to the years I'd poured into this dream, when my phone buzzed. A text from my father. Family dinner at 7 p.m., important discussion. I stared at the screen, the glow reflecting in my eyes, and felt something shift, not hope, not fear, but a cold clarity. This wasn't reconciliation. It was reckoning. I remembered being 21, sitting on the edge of a college dorm bed with a half-read textbook in my lap, waiting for a call that never came. I remembered nights curled up in my car, because rent was due and my parents said struggle would build character. And now, despite the headlines and investors calling, a small piece of me still wondered if showing up could change the story. I closed my laptop, grabbed my simple jacket, and skipped the luxury SUV. The old sedan, with its worn steering wheel and stubborn AC, was familiar to them. Humble appearances keep predictable people. Predictable people make mistakes. On the drive to the country club, memories surfaced uninvited. Every missed graduation, every half-hearted holiday, every glance that lingered longer on someone else. The way I had learned to shrink myself so their disappointment wouldn't feel so large. And yet tonight felt different. Tonight I wasn't just the overlooked son. Tonight I was the one who had built something they could never ignore. The skyline stretched beyond the glass like a constellation I'd mapped myself. And for the first time in years, the weight of their judgment didn't crush me. I was walking into their world on my terms, and they didn't even realize it. Yet before I continue, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. The country club doors loomed ahead, polished and gleaming, a world I had always been on the outside of. As I stepped in, I felt the familiar pang of being measured, not by who I had become, but by the child I once was. Gregory's eyes found me first, sharp and calculating, like he was trying to read every line of my success and find the flaw he had always suspected. Helena hovered nearby, her smile practiced, polite but brittle. Marcus leaned back in his chair the way he always did, with that look of someone passing judgment from a mountaintop he'd never climbed. And Dylan, phone in hand, filming the room like it was a stage for his own life, not mine. I took a seat at the head of the table, the one they expected me to shrink from, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. There was no warmth here, no congratulations, just expectation, the kind that demands explanation for why I had dared to succeed. Without their permission, I watched their hands, their gestures, the subtle shifts in posture, and I remembered every slight, every dismissal, every time I had waited for recognition that never came. I wasn't here for apologies, I didn't need them. I was here to be seen on my own terms, the way they should have seen me all along. When my father finally spoke, it was clipped, formal, the kind of tone reserved for business negotiations. "David, we need to talk about your valuation." I let him finish, nodding once, letting the words hang in the air. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't nervous, I was calculating, observing. Every sentence, every glance, every subtle twitch told me more than 1,000 words ever could. This dinner wasn't about me. It was about them, about their pride, their control, and their need to reclaim the narrative they had tried to write for my life. I smiled slightly, a small, quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer the boy they had dismissed. I had come to this table armed not with hope, but with the truth I had won, whether they wanted to admit it or not. The conversation started cautiously, each word measured as if stepping on a misstep could topple the fragile balance of civility they had built around themselves. Gregory leaned forward, fingers tapping the polished table, eyes narrowing. "David, we never expected—" His voice faltered, betraying a flicker of the disbelief he couldn't fully hide. I let the pause stretch, savoring the unspoken admission that my success had outgrown their expectations. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was curious, watching them scramble quietly to adjust their perception of me. Helena chimed in, her tone syrupy, rehearsed. We didn't realize it would be so much. We thought, well, we didn't understand." I could feel the weight of years of condescension, the subtle dismissals, the endless comparisons to cousins and friends who had failed or succeeded. in ways they deemed worthy. I leaned back, folding my hands calmly on the table, and let the silence do the work. I'd always been the overlooked one, the one whose victories were ignored, until they became impossible to ignore. Marcus finally spoke, his voice dripping with that same patronizing tone he had perfected over the years. You know, David, success is more than numbers. It's about connections, reputation, legacy. I stared at him, letting the words sink. He had never understood the nights I spent building this company from scratch, the doors I had knocked on, the investors I had charmed, the risks I had taken that no one else had dared. Legacy, I thought, is exactly what I've built. Without your guidance, without your permission. Dylan, of course, had no filter. He filmed the room with his phone, occasionally smirking like the drama was meant to amuse him, not humble him. I imagined posting a clip of his self-importance online, but I restrained myself. Victory wasn't in revenge, it was in the quiet satisfaction of being untouchable. Then came the subtle shift, the hesitation, the quick glance exchanged between Gregory and Helena, the recognition that their carefully constructed hierarchy had been disrupted. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit their expectations, but tonight I occupied every inch of the space they had once dominated. Their polite phrases and rehearsed concern didn't scare me. They were learning in real time that the David they had dismissed was gone. In his place was someone forged from every disappointment, every night of struggle, every moment they had failed to show up. I spoke finally, calmly measured, letting my words cut through the tension. I built this because I believed it could exist. Not because I needed approval, not because I wanted permission, but because it mattered, and it does. To me, I watched them process it. The discomfort, the uncertainty, the silent acknowledgement that the boy they had overlooked was now a man they couldn't ignore. This wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even confrontation. It was reckoning, a slow, deliberate realization that I had grown into something larger than their expectations, something they could no longer control. The tension at the table thickened, the kind that made air feel heavy and words feel sharp. Gregory cleared his throat, trying to regain the composure he thought would intimidate me. David, we need to understand how this happened so fast. 92 million. It's unexpected. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the faint tremor of unease behind his carefully controlled expression. That was the moment I realized they were no longer the gatekeepers of my life. I had crossed a threshold they hadn't anticipated, and it rattled them in ways my victories never could have if I had played small. Helena's hands trembled slightly as she pushed a glass of water across the table, the first sign that their practiced serenity was cracking. She tried to mask it with a gentle smile, but her eyes betrayed the anxiety she couldn't quite hide. We didn't realize the scale of your work. David, maybe we underestimated you. Her words floated in the air, thin and fragile, as if they were testing me, seeing whether I would forgive, whether I would shrink. I didn't. I leaned forward just slightly, not enough to seem aggressive, but enough to assert presence. Underestimating me has been a family tradition, I said softly, letting each word land carefully. Deliberately, Marcus opened his mouth, probably to deliver another lecture on proper business conduct or what real success looks like. But he stopped halfway through, caught in a hesitation that told me he was beginning to see the truth. Dylan, ever the performer, finally lowered his phone, his smirk fading as he realized this moment wasn't about him. It never had been. Their world, carefully curated for appearances and control, was unraveling, and I was the quiet storm at the center of it. I could feel years of pain, frustration and disappointment surfacing in a single, crystalline clarity. Every ignored phone call, every cold holiday, every graduation or milestone I had attended without so much as a nod from them, all of it had led to this. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel the need to apologize for existing or for succeeding. The power of my achievement wasn't just in the numbers or the headlines. It was in the recognition that I had built a life and a legacy they could no longer dismiss. I let the silence stretch, giving them space to process the reality that their family dynamic, the hierarchy, the judgments, the expectations, was no longer theirs to control. And in that silence, I finally understood something crucial. Tonight wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about seeing them realize that I had always been capable, always been driven, and always deserved to be seen. Not for what they thought I should be, but for what I had become. That knowledge, quiet and unwavering, filled me with a power that no amount of past neglect could ever take away. By the time the main course arrived, the conversation had shifted into a careful dance. Words chosen, glances exchanged, and the unspoken acknowledgement that nothing would ever be the same. Gregory tried again, softer this time. "David, we just want to support you in the ways that matter." I smiled faintly, letting the words hang in the air, because I understood exactly what he meant. They wanted to reclaim influence over me, to feel like they had shaped my success when in reality, they had only tried to suppress it. "Support isn't needed, Father," I said calmly, my voice steady. "Recognition is optional. Approval? That's irrelevant to what I've built." Helena's hands fidgeted with her napkin, twisting it tighter and tighter, as if holding on to it could anchor her control over the evening. We want to understand the choices you've made. David, your future, your decisions." I shook my head slowly. "My future is mine to decide," I said softly, letting each word resonate. "The choices I've made, the risks I've taken, they were never about fitting into your expectations. They were about building something that matters for me, not for you." Marcus's voice wavered as he tried to assert himself again. "But David, don't you think—" I cut him off gently, not out of anger, but out of a deliberate clarity that I would no longer be lectured to by someone who had never walked in my shoes. "I think exactly what I need to think," I said, and let my gaze drift toward Dylan. He lowered his phone again, finally noticing the gravity in the room. I could see the faint flicker of surprise, maybe even respect, but it wasn't admiration. I saw it. It was acknowledgement of reality. The tension reached a peak when Gregory leaned back silent, trying to regain the authority he had lost. I watched him carefully, the careful calculation, the pride bruised by his inability to control this narrative. "You've grown into something we didn't foresee," he admitted finally, voice low, almost grudging. I nodded, not because I sought his praise, but because the statement itself was a victory, a recognition that I had survived and thrived, in spite of every expectation they had tried to impose on me. Felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity I hadn't known in years. I had walked into this dinner expecting discomfort, perhaps confrontation, maybe even bitterness, but instead, I was here as someone fully realized, someone untouchable in the quiet power of self-made success. The city lights outside the country club, windows reflected in the polished surfaces around us, a constellation that belonged only to me, and for the first time, I realized that their judgment, their condescension, their attempts to shape me, they were irrelevant. What mattered was what I had built, the person I had become, and the unwavering knowledge that I would never shrink for anyone again. The air had grown heavy with unspoken realizations. The polite pretense of control that my family had tried to maintain was cracking, revealing the unease beneath. Gregory's jaw was tight, his hands clenched around the edges of the table as if holding himself together physically would somehow regain authority. Helena's practiced smile had dulled, her eyes flickering between concern, confusion, and something I hadn't seen before, fear. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed it instantly. They were finally seeing me not as the child they dismissed, but as the man I had become. Marcus attempted another intervention, a lecture disguised as advice. "David, surely you understand. This valuation, it doesn't mean—" I stopped him with a look, calm but unyielding. "It doesn't mean I need validation from you," I said quietly, letting the words sink in. "It never did, and it never will. I've built this because I believed it could exist, not because I needed your approval, or anyone else's." I could see the tension tighten in his shoulders, the habitual confidence he always wore now replaced with the realization that his influence over me had evaporated long ago. Dylan, who had been quietly observing, lowered his phone completely, finally taking in the weight of the room. The performance he had relied on, his self-importance, his charm, fell flat against the reality of who I had become. I could almost feel their old hierarchy crumble in real time. Every calculated move, every subtle power play, rendered meaningless by the truth I carried with me. I had survived, I had thrived, and nothing they said or did could erase that. Then Gregory spoke again, his voice lower this time, almost vulnerable. "David, we didn't realize." His words trailed off and I let the silence stretch, letting him feel the years of neglect, the quiet endurance it had taken to get here. "We didn't realize," I echoed softly, "how capable I could be without your guidance. How far I could go while you were busy overlooking me." It wasn't anger, it was clarity. A calm power that came from finally owning my own story. I saw them shift, subtle yet undeniable. The tension wasn't just in their faces, it was in the room, in the weight of all those moments they had missed. The holidays they had ignored, the milestones they had allowed to pass without acknowledgement. And I realized something profound. I didn't need them to see me to know my worth. I didn't need them to celebrate me to feel complete. Their reckoning was their own burden. My victory had never been about proving them wrong. It had always been about proving to myself that I could rise. Despite them, for the first time, the power in the room felt equalized. I wasn't pleading for recognition, nor was I seeking revenge. I was simply present, grounded in my success, unshakable in my own identity. The lights of the city outside the windows reflected off the polished table, a quiet reminder that my world had expanded far beyond their expectations, far beyond the limits they had tried to impose. And as I sat there, calm and composed, I understood that this moment, this quiet, potent reckoning was more satisfying than any applause or approval could ever be. The last sip of wine sat untouched on the table. The quiet between us had transformed into something heavier, something almost sacred. My family had exhausted their rehearsed words, their carefully curated expressions of concern, judgment, and subtle condescension. And yet here I was, calm, collected, untouchable in the certainty of who I had become. Gregory's eyes, once sharp and controlling, now flickered with something I had never seen. A grudging respect mingled with disbelief. Helena's hands rested on her lap, her usual polish replaced by a quiet tension, the kind that comes from realizing the rules they once lived by no longer applied. Marcus's voice, which had carried authority for so long, had faltered, shrinking under the weight of my presence. Dylan, for once, had nothing to perform. No camera, no smirk, no smug commentary, just a silent acknowledgement that the center of attention was no longer his to command. They had been forced in a single evening to confront the truth that their hierarchy, their assumptions, and their long-held judgments had no bearing on the person I had become. I spoke finally, softly but with conviction, letting each word resonate in the stillness of the room. "I didn't come here tonight seeking validation, or apologies, or even understanding. I came because you called me, and I wanted to see if the old expectations still applied. They don't. I've built this life on my own terms, and I've succeeded despite the absence of your support. That is the only truth you need to acknowledge." I watched them, every flicker of discomfort, every hesitant glance, and I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. Not pride, not arrogance, but a deep, unshakable clarity. Gregory finally exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly, and admitted, almost reluctantly, "You've become more than we imagined." And there it was, the words I had waited decades to hear, not as a reward, but as confirmation that my journey, my struggle, and my choices were real, undeniable, and irrevocable. Helena nodded silently. Marcus stared at his hands, and Dylan finally met my gaze without pretense. I leaned back, letting the moment sink in. I wasn't seeking reconciliation, though perhaps that could come in time. I wasn't seeking to punish, though the quiet reckoning I had delivered was enough. I was simply here, fully realized and unshakable. The city lights outside painted constellations across the windows, mirrored in the polished surfaces of the country club, a reminder that my world was vast, limitless, and entirely mine. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free, not from them, but from the need for them to define me. Tonight had been their reckoning. Yes, but it had also been mine, a confirmation that I had endured, succeeded, and transcended every expectation, every slight, every limitation they had tried to impose. And as I stood to leave, I did so with a quiet confidence that nothing in that room or anywhere else could ever diminish again. I was David, self-made, unbroken, and finally fully seen.